Up until 2009, healthcare in Alberta was managed by smaller community-centered boards, but that all changed with the creation of a centralized health authority. To talk more specifically about Alberta Health Services is University of Alberta professor and author John Church. Earlier this year, John Church wrote a book entitled Alberta, a Health System Profile. He joins us now from Edmonton. John, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on today.
Great to be here.
Okay, so John, you mentioned in your book that Alberta spends the highest amounts in Canada for healthcare costs, but has mediocre outcomes. So did you find a reason for this?
Well, the book was not really about trying to define what the reason is, and it's quite complicated. But the bottom line is Alberta spends more per capita than any other part of Canada, and yet we, don't perform as well on some of the basic outcome measures as they do in other parts of Canada. So there is a big question mark there that needs to be addressed by the government itself.
That is so interesting. So, of course, we've been hearing from our new Alberta Premier about possible changes to Alberta Health Services. So can you describe if you've noticed the level of healthcare services change for Albertans since the creation of this centralized board?
Well, Alberta was not performing well on those comparative measures prior to AHS, but the development of AHS didn't really improve Alberta's performance compared to other provinces. I mean, there were some gains, but you can see that by and large, the system has not performed as well as it should. And, I should, to give AHS credit, they haven't had any stable leadership since they were created. There was significant political interference from the province from the get-go. And I think that is part of the reason that they have not been able to perform as well as an organization, because there's been too much political interference from provincial politicians.
Yeah, good point. And of course, now it's all over the news. And so
now they're doing it again. The time when Alberta Health Services was starting to perform better was when Verna Yu was in charge, and she was in for 6 years. So she was the longest serving leader, CEO that they've had since they were created. And there was also greater stability with the board as well during that time period. So the government during that time period didn't meddle as much in the daily operations of Alberta Health Services as they had previously done. And that's when the organization seemed to be starting to perform better. So, political interference, I think, is a real problem with the way they're trying to run things.
Okay, so I mean, everyone's talking about their failures these days, but to be fair to them, are there any successes that you've seen that have advanced healthcare services for Albertans through AHS?
Oh, for sure. They've been able to bring down costs through being able to do bulk purchasing of a lot of stuff that gets used in the health system. So rather than having each individual regional health authority, or in the old days, each individual hospital having to make their own purchases, Alberta Health Services can make purchases just for one organization at the provincial level, and they have more buying power, so to speak, in the marketplace because they are such a big organization. So, I mean, that's one example. They're doing things now to get health providers to collaborate more with each other, work together more with each other. So there have been a variety of things that they have been able to do, but that's only to the extent that there hasn't been political interference, and that they've had sufficient funding from the provincial government to be able to get on and do the job that they're supposed to be doing. And both of those things have been an issue really since the creation of Alberta Health Services, if not before.
Mm-hmm. And so then, in your opinion, what would be the biggest failure? Would it be the political interference like you were mentioning?
I think that the constant political interference it's extremely disruptive If you think about any business that you're trying to run, and if you were constantly changing the senior manager, the person who's running your company, and you're constantly interfering with the way they were trying to run that company, what do you think the results would be?
Right. Yeah. Now, John, from your research, which you've done a lot of, what would be the most effective course of change for AHS and the United Conservative Party, for that matter? So, do you think it's fair for Danielle Smith to be placing the blame, all the blame, at the foot of the board? And should she clean house like she says she's going to?
No, because the current UCP government, the Kenny government, they actually appointed almost all those people, and some of them were only appointed a couple of months ago. So why Daniel Smith thinks that coming in and getting rid of people who are appointed by her own government is going to fix or change anything, doesn't really make any sense. Other than that, she's looking for somebody to punish because of some of the decisions that were made by the government about restrictions that were placed on people during the pandemic that were unpopular with a very small percentage of the Alberta population. But that small percentage, just happened to be the people that are supporting Daniel Smith. So, beyond that, there is no clear rationale as to why this is going to fix anything in the healthcare system. If they really want to fix things in the healthcare system, what the government could do is they could come up with a policy for seniors services to make sure that seniors get the supports that they need out in communities, so that they don't end, things like help shoveling snow, help cutting their grass, maintaining their properties, help getting groceries, help cleaning their house, not to mention the home care services that they already get, so the medical related services they already get. If the government would come up with a really good policy for that, and if the government would also come up with a policy for ensuring that all Albertans have got access to primary care out in the community, those two things alone would go a long way to helping out to bring down the pressures that are on acute care facilities. Because everyone now, they end up going to acute care facilities because they can't get the care that they need out in the community. So if the government really wanted to do something, they would do that. And that's not on AHS, because AHS does not control a lot of those things that are going on out in the community. That's government that's controlling that, and it's government and the relationship with the province's doctors. So, that would be a better use of government's time than trying to constantly shuffle the deck chairs on the SSAHS, right? Which is, what they seem to be constantly doing.
John, you just mentioned something very interesting, very important: doctors. Okay, so obviously a big issue in many Alberta communities, like Lethbridge, for instance, is that they've been seeing a lack of family doctors. So did you find in your research clues as to why doctors are leaving Alberta?
Well, I mean, when I did my research, the physician population was fairly stable in Alberta, and it was actually the decision by the UCP government to rip up the collective agreement with the doctors that started that movement by doctors to leave the province. And in fact, the government had to sort of push back and say, well, if you're going to leave the province, you've got to give us notice. You can't just all start leaving all at once, because they were afraid that out in rural communities in particular, that you might get a whole group of doctors that would just decide all at once they were going to leave. Right. So yeah, again, that rests squarely on the shoulders of the current UCP government, that we're having that kind of a problem with doctors. Now, again, if the government wanted to do something about that, they would look at what other healthcare providers might provide the same or similar services to family doctors. And clearly the research indicates that nurse practitioners could fill that role if they were given the chance. But the government here has never been willing to make that move and start putting nurse practitioners out in rural areas in significant enough numbers to make any difference in terms of how rural Albertans are able to access their healthcare services. And for your viewers who are living in rural Alberta, research clearly shows that nurse practitioners are trained in a very similar way to family doctors, and that they can provide you with the level of care, a very similar level of care to family doctors. So they are highly qualified. They simply need government to put a policy in place that will make it possible for them to work out in rural communities. Not to mention, they could be used in long-term care facilities as well to beef up the level of care that Alberta seniors are getting in long-term care facilities. So there are options out there
Yeah,
that the
definitely.
government could pursue if it wanted to.
Yeah, that's a great solution. I know you've mentioned a few other as well. Can you think of any other solutions that would bring spending and health outcomes more in line with expectations?
Well, those are really I mean, for me, the major issue is relieving pressures on the acute care system, and those pressures are caused largely by the fact that people do not have enough options out in the community so that they can deal with their issues out in the community and they don't end up on the doorstep of the hospital constantly. So, I mean, I've given you a couple of possible examples of how that might be dealt with, but there are all kinds of innovative things that might be done out in the community to keep people out in the community, keep people healthier out in the community, keep people closer to their families, especially seniors, because no senior wants to go to a long-term care facility. They would rather remain in their community, close to their friends and family, and be supported in that way. And that's really the thing we need to look at, is how we can make that happen. I mean, for mental health patients, the same thing. They end up in the emergency room because there's nowhere else in the community for them to go, because there aren't enough resources out there under the way things are currently run. So, you know, deal with stuff out in the community, get the community side of things organized so that people have sufficient resources to get the services they need out there. And the problems in hospitals, by and large, will be resolved.
Now, John, would there maybe be another national healthcare system that would be a good option or a good example for this government to maybe investigate and perhaps emulate here in our province?
Well, I mean, the province of Ontario, comparatively speaking, spends far less money per capita than the province of Alberta. So, there's obviously something going on in Ontario that allows them to spend less money than Alberta, and also to, on a lot of indicators, perform better than Alberta. So there's definitely something going on there. And in fact, the current government in Ontario, which is also a conservative government, incidentally, has recently announced that it wants to put more nurse practitioners in long-term care facilities. So that was, one of the things that I suggested. Ontario is already doing it. So obviously Ontario is listening to the advice that they're getting from their experts, and they're taking that advice and they're trying to turn it into policies that are going to make their system better. And I think that, the government here is going to have to listen to the advice of the experts and move forward on making some of these changes and stop spending their time fiddling around with who's on the board of AHS.
Oh, great advice there. And why spend time looking beyond borders when there's solutions right here within Canada and even within Alberta? John, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. That was the University of Alberta professor John Church, who is the author of Alberta, A Health System Profile, who joined us from Edmonton today. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.